Daniel. We know we looked last week back, and I don't know, I felt like we're talking about a decree that was issued, and sometimes I think we forget the background to it. And I think that in doing so, we kind of forget some of the things that went on back in that day and time. And I think sometimes we also have a tendency to forget what the meaning of some of this, what's going on. And Daniel was in a unique position. These are all real happenings. They're not, I don't want to call them stories, and that's what we tend to call them. They're not stories, they're not parables, they're real happenings of real people. And again, when you stop and think about the fact that buried in Iran is Daniel, and there is some evidence that his 3 friends are buried there. And also you have buried there is Esther and Mordecai. It's not, it's not something which is secret. Again, don't take lightly what a lot of the Arab archaeologists say. They have done a good service in remembering many of the things that have gone on in the past. And those things have meaning today. Y'all remember if you remember the story of an archaeologist just arrived in Cairo. He went north to the land of Goshen, and as he drove along, he noticed that there was a canal that ran alongside the road, and on the other side was the Nile River. And he asked the driver, what was the name of that canal? And he said, it's the Canal of Joseph. If you stop and think about it, he said his reaction was to almost drop his teeth. I mean, it was just, like, what are you telling me? He said, is this a tourist thing? Whether it's Jew or Arab, they have a tendency to match the things that fit pretty much alongside of your belief. And he said, how long has it been named that? He said, forever, thousands of years. He said, do you have any idea what it means? And the guy said, yes, we do. He said, it's, we feel like for sure that it's the canal that Joseph dug to make it through a 7-year famine. And he said he was stunned at what took place. So, you look back and say, all of a sudden that makes things different. Y'all understand, if you were sitting there and you're going along, and it's, the only thing I can relate it to is being in Jordan, and I'm looking at a highway that we're driving on, and I look at our Jordanian guide, and I ask him, what's the name of the highway? And I'm trying to look for it on a map. Because on the map, it's marked as the King's Highway. And he said it's the King's Highway. And a friend of mine was there, and I looked at him and said, Wally, do you know where we're at? He said, I'm beginning to really realize where we're at. We're on the road that thousands of people who we've mentioned in Scripture, the Jews went along. I mean, we went along, the King's Highway is mentioned something like 15, 16 times in Scripture. And here we're riding along this thing, and we're totally oblivious to what should be something that's very important. And it was. I mean, it's just like all of a sudden the trip had meaning. You drive up to a place on the side of Mount Nebo, and it's a lot of what we're looking at is in Arabic. And I asked one of the guides that was there, where are we at? He said, Moses' burial place. Well, would that do to you? What would be your first thoughts? You know, I mean, it's all of a sudden, it's real. It's there. Here's Moses, and you might say, you know, we get a little cynical. We begin to say, it doesn't mean anything. Well, in reality, it does. It really does. It puts something, it means something in a different light or different fashion. It's the same way here. So in Daniel chapter 9, verse number 24, 70 weeks are determined upon thy people and upon thy holy city to finish the transgression and to make an end of sins and to make reconciliation for iniquity and to break in everlasting righteousness and to seal up the vision and prophecy and to anoint the most holy. And to know therefore and understand that from the going forth of the commandment to restore and to build Jerusalem unto the Messiah the Prince shall be 7 weeks, and 62 weeks. And the street shall be built again, and the wall, even in troublesome times. And after 62 weeks shall Messiah be cut off, but not for himself, and the people of the Prince that shall come shall destroy the city and the sanctuary, and the end thereof shall be with a flood, and unto the end of the war desolations are determined. And he shall confirm the covenant with many for 1 week. And in the midst of the week he shall cause the sacrifice and the oblation to cease, and for the overspreading of abominations he shall make it desolate, even until the consummation, and that determined shall be poured upon the desolate. So he gives us some descriptions. We talked last week about the fact that, you know, the prince of the Mede-Persians has put out a decree to rebuild a temple in Jerusalem, to rebuild the city, to do what God is asking. He is matching the prophecy that's given, and it's about 516 BC. I've got something I'll give. If you're a good mathematician, I'll give you a problem afterwards, and I'll let you work on it, because I've tried every way I can, and I can't come up with the right answer. But it is saying, in essence, that these weeks or half weeks and so forth, if you put them together in the right way, mathematically, it comes out to saying that Israel would come back to life in May of 1948. Now that's in the book of Jeremiah. And that, you know, all of a sudden you're going, whoa, can it really be that accurate? Why not? God's in control of history. God's in control of everything. And I think that, in all honesty, there's a lot of things that we should see there, but we don't, because we're not good students of Scripture today. And we've lost some effort to stay in track with it. So I want to take a look just for a little bit tonight and kind of show you one thing that's always kind of stood out in my mind, because I think that the one thing that I questioned when I first looked at this is, how do you know a week is you know, what's it mean? Why should I say it amounts to 7 years? What makes it that? Where can I prove it? Is this just something that C.I. Scofield and some of the other men who lived about the 1850s, they pulled it out of nowhere and they set it up? And they acknowledged that and said, this is a prophetic year, prophetic day, prophetic week. And they have set it up so that it all fits together. Or is it something that, in all honesty, fits with what's been known all along? I did not bring it tonight. Dr. Sherman went out and ordered a copy of what's called Against Heresies. It's a book that Irenaeus wrote. And again, Irenaeus, Polycarp, the Apostle John. That's about as close as you're going to get. Irenaeus, Polycarp, the Apostle John. And Dr. Sherman went out and ordered the thing. The only problem with it is it's about number 9 type. And those eyes do not see number 9 type. But he got hold of a large reading glass, and then one of the men who happens to be hanging around here occasionally brought me one too, so that we could read that. But in book 5 of Against Heresies, Irenaeus comes down and begins to say, here is what he had been taught by Polycarp, who had been taught by John. That's pretty close. When you stop and think about it in light of it being as close as it would be to somebody who would really know and really have good answers, well, he would have. By the way, I read, just before I left the house, I read a sentence in a book which said that the first rendition or the first rendering we have of the second coming and the discussion of it like we would know it was done in the 4th century AD, and it's not true. It's way back, right back to the very beginning of it. So just for a few minutes to kind of take a look at some things that I think would help you say, this is where we arrive at that. This is where we get the answer to this. I think it might be good, excuse me, to take a look at it. I need to turn something around here. So how do we know that 1 week is 7 years? Look at Numbers chapter 14. Numbers 14. And I'm going to ask you to turn there, but so that way if we decide to do a little going to either side, we can. Numbers 14:34. Numbers 14:34. And after the number of the days in which you search the land, even 40 days, each day for a year shall you bear your iniquities, even 40 years, and you shall know my breach of promise. What's he talking about? What's he talking about here? Y'all that afraid to answer?
Isn't that when the spies went into the...
Yeah. And how long did they spend?
40 years.
40 days. So he's saying, here's what I'm going to do. You're going to roam out in the desert here for 40 years in punishment for the 40 days that you spent searching in Israel and the rejection that you came up with upon your looking at the nation of Israel, at the land of Israel, and rejecting it. I mean, it's not something that when you look at it, it's not something at all which would have been very deep. It's someone that took a look and they rejected the promises of God. One of the things that a guide will carry will be a pin that she'll wear, and in that pin is two men who are carrying a group of grapes that are so large it takes 2 people to carry them. And it's a symbolism of the two of the spies who went in, came back out carrying grapes that were so huge, so big, that it took 2 men to carry them. But instead of them really going in and making a search of it and stopping it and putting into practice what they had already seen God do, they went in, took a look around, kind of skimmed over things, and said, let's go home. And they rejected it. They took it away. So what God's saying here is very simple, very clear cut. I told you to take a good look, come back out with a good report, and I would give you the land if you decided to go across the River Jordan. Instead, they what? They rejected it. So he said, you spend 40 days looking, now take 40 years so you get a good view. Oh, it's not going to be the land of Israel you're going to see. It's going to be the land all around Israel. You're going to get to see into it, and you're going to have a great deal of time to research it and get to know the outskirts and edges of it. But kind of basically, you're being punished. You're definitely being punished for the time that's there. And it's 1 day equals a year all the way through. And so they spent 40 years out wandering in the wilderness, when they should have already been in there and settled and taking their, taking all of their goods and their land and conquering the farms that they should have had. They should have had the cities. They should have been done with it. Instead, symbolically, they have to spend 40 years out there. And so he's trying to tell us here, look, guys, here it is. The same prophetic year, same prophetic days that you have through here, you're gonna live through, only out in the desert. And I have to tell you, let me assure you, if you think it's hot here, I was talking to somebody one day, and I said, I've seen it. I said, I've seen it to 120 degrees in that desert. He said, there's no place on earth that gets to be 120 degrees. And I said, I think there is. I said, no, he said, it just doesn't happen. He said, that's old wives' tales. I think there's probably a couple of guys around here, I saw their eyes go up, because if you've been out there, it does. I stepped off the bus in a place that is down in the desert. I looked at the temperature, and it was 118 degrees. I thought it was 1,800 degrees. I mean, it was just like when that door came open on that bus and that heat hit, it just dominated everything. Now, could be part of it was we were on pavement. We had hard soil that was around us. We had rocks, huge rocks and boulders that were hard, and a lot of it was lava stone and so forth. So that was part of the heat. It was picking it up and radiating it back, but nonetheless, it was over 120 degrees. I mean, it just cooks everything. It'll pop windows out of cars. It'll pop tires. It'll do all kinds of things that you don't think are very popular. I walked outside after a teen trip one time in a van that I owned. I came to the house and I parked it, locked everything up, went in, went to bed. We'd been up till 2 o'clock in the morning. Then I went in there, went to bed, and that night I heard a poof real loud. I did not see what it was. The next day, as I went out on it, I had a bronze-colored window in the back of the Chevy van, and it had taken that thing and just shattered it. And that day it went to about 112 degrees. And it just shattered that thing, because I had not opened up an area to let the pressure go out of it. So this is an area that he's looking and saying, you're going to spend this much time out there in the desert. Now, it's hot. It would be easy to make a little comparison to another place that's not on earth. And it would be very fitting because it's hot, very hot. By the way, at night, it will drop into the 40s, and you'll think you're going to die. So it's a very unique place, and they could have avoided all this. That's the point. Everybody this could have been avoided, but no, not. They took to the hard way out. And what I want you to see out of here, he's saying that every 40 days, each day for a year shall you bear your iniquities. It's the same type of a symbolism which is given every year or every day, whatever goes on here. So he's saying it's identical. It's the same. Look at Ezekiel chapter 4. Ezekiel 4. Ezekiel 4. I have to be real honest. I've read this several times. Ezekiel got the worst part of the deal. Ezekiel 4, verse number 5. Ezekiel is being punished along with the rest of the Jewish nation, and he's being told to do certain things. Start at verse number 4. Lay thou also upon thy left side, and lay the iniquity of the house of Israel upon it. According to the number of the days that thou shalt lie upon it, thou shalt bear their iniquity. For I have laid upon thee the years of their iniquity, according to the number of the days, 390 days shalt thou bear the iniquity of the house of Israel. And when thou hast accomplished them, lie again on thy right side, and thou shalt bear the iniquity of the house of Judah. 40 days I have appointed thee each day for a year. Therefore thou shalt set thy face toward the siege of Jerusalem, and thine arm shall be uncovered, and thou shalt prophesy against it. And behold, I will lay bands upon thee, and thou shalt not turn thee from one side to another, till thou hast ended the days of thy siege. By the way, how many of y'all had a bad night last night? This is a bad night. Because if you're taking a look at him, he is spending over 1 year laying on one side. And then he gets a chance to flip over on the other side and lay on the other side for a much shorter period of time. But what he's looking at and seeing is the representation of 1 day for a year in the future. 1 day for a year. Why would I not then look at what Daniel's writing in the book of Daniel and say, this is the same process. This is the same symbolism. And like I said, I've got I'd have to look it up back on my computer, but it gives you the number of days, and it actually breaks them down into 1,260 days. I have never used it because I cannot make it match. I cannot pull it together. So it's yours. You're the math teacher. So it's just, I mean, it's something which is, I know it works out, and it's just somehow that I've not found the key to it to put it together. But literally it works out to 1,260 days, 1,260 years, 1,260 whatever. But if you look in the book of Revelation, what's it talk about? 1,260 days. Look at the end of Daniel, Daniel chapter 12.